All right, and we are live on Facebook, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome, Swordsquatch, session 2, first day. We're really glad that you came to join us today, and we're really excited to have Charles Lynn here talking to you today. My name is Shauna Zach. I have been with Swordsquatch sort of since the beginning. The first year, I was just a volunteer. After that, they invited me to be an organizer. So I've been an organizer for what is now my 5th year at Swordsquatch. So it's just me and Charles today. We don't have any moderators today, but we just want to give you a good reminder of our code. We are fully behind Black Lives Matter. You need to be kind to each other and be patient with technical difficulties. We are still expecting you to hold to the Swordsquatch code of conduct. And we also want to recognize that we are broadcasting from Duwamish native lands here in Seattle, and they were stolen from those people years ago. And we want to recognize that, and we're working to get them equity in this neighborhood. We're sponsored this year by Purple Heart Armory, which is a great source for all your HEMA needs. So head on over there and check that out. If you need assistance or have a question, please use the chat box in the Q&A section, and we will also use that to ask Charles questions when he opens things up for questions. And also feel free to use the chat to communicate with each other. And then we've also launched the Discord channel today. So find that link on our Facebook page. You can go into Discord, hang out with other Swordsquatch people this weekend. You can chat with each other during the live tournament, or if you just want to talk to each other in general. We miss being with you, and we miss seeing your faces so much. So we're hoping to give you guys another channel to just hang out with each other. So that's it. That's all the announcements I have. So I'm going to go ahead and let Charles take center stage here.
Cool. Thank you. So I'm going to shut down the chat questions. So if you could just, if you feel like there's a question that's appropriate to stop, feel free to interrupt me and kind of speak and kind of use the moderator's hammer to insert a question that might be more relevant in the moment. I don't mind. Okay, so today I'd like to talk about a series of activities that I've been undertaking over the past roughly two and a half years. I struggle with a really good word for them, and the best singular word that it describes it is experiments. They're activities designed to ask a question and provide a decent answer. Not the correct answer, but maybe a decent answer. And these are generally revolving around arms. First off, I want to give you a quick kind of introduction, tell you about who I am. However, I saw most of the people in the audience actually already know me or already participated. So, this might be old hat for a lot of people. So first off, I'm Charles. I've been doing HEMA for about 7 years, and but that includes pandemic time. I train with Capital KDF, Capital Kunstfestens in Washington, D.C. I also teach there too. One of my main goals in these activities that I'll describe later on is to search for context for Kunstfestens, early Lichtenauer, basically the martial arts practiced in the late 15th century, and then also plus or minus 50 years I'm also interested in. And so a lot of my activities are aimed at providing the little nuggets of context and detail that either could help us understand Kunstfestens or just make it seem more alive, right? Because right now, KDF is like a Frankenstein. It's just this thing that we've resurrected. It moves in robotic ways. Can we teach it to, can we make it feel more alive? The second goal revolves around military history. I'm kind of a geek for military history. And so a lot of the activities, even if they provided no useful insight or context for KDF or HEMA or fencing in general, are still interesting to me. And I would wager that a lot of the people who are into HEMA, there's a huge correlation of people who are interested in military history. So a secondary objective for these goals, like broader philosophical goals, is for to explore military history in a perhaps applied sense, and maybe we can, tease out some insights that would be useful. I have a disclaimer. Okay, so the disclaimer is first, this work is very preliminary. Although we've been doing it for 2 years, the pandemic has stopped us. We've really only had, I would say, 3.5, maybe 4 potential events or like outings, and that's really not enough to have a concrete methodology. I just want to get stuff out there right now because some of my work is getting popular. I think that there are some people who are exploring context, and they're acquiring a lot of the material that one would need to explore context. And I want to try to get some ideas out there, to get some ideas about methodology and philosophy out there for people to mull over. And that's what this talk is about. This talk isn't about cool military details or, me bragging about the suffering that we did, which is, in the grand context of things, not that much. It's not about the suffering that we did. It's rather about the methodology and the philosophy, how we frame the activities that we're doing, how we approach the types of activities that we're doing. So that's the main disclaimer. There will be pretty pictures. There will be descriptions of activities that should be engaging and really should, for many people I know, lights this fire inside of them that they didn't know they had. But really this talk is about methodology and philosophy. So you thought you were getting like, cool armor stuff or armor details, but in actuality, it's like a boring talk on methodology. Okay, so let's dive into it. I'm just gonna talk right now about what it is. Hang on, let me check my time. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the origin. The origin for this whole thread, all of these activities, comes from Long Point 2019. Long Point 2019 is kind of the premier US HEMA competition, and I signed up for the Heavy Pentathlon. The Heavy Pentathlon is a competition that requires you to fence in armor, outside of armor. You need to cut, you need to do paired technique, which is judged, and then you need to wrestle. Those 5 things are what comprises that competition. And I signed up for it about a year, I think maybe 9 months in advance, when I knew I wanted to collect armor, but I didn't know that I was going to commit to sign up for a competition. So when it was announced, I said, fuck it. I'm just gonna, oh wait, this is recorded. Okay, whatever. I just bleep this out later. I just said, fuck it. I'm going to sign up for it, and I'm going to figure out how to get harnessed by the time I need to compete. A lot of the time up until that competition was me figuring out how the hell I was going to do this. And so I had to acquire a lot of skills. So, sewing, I had to modify garments. I had to do strapping, think about making scabbards for weapons. I had to tailor mail, and I had to modify plate. I can't make plate. But the big skill that I learned in having to go down this route was research. I had to engage very directly with primary sources, which I would not have otherwise engaged with if I was just sticking to traditional bloss fencing. I had to think about historic armor. What does it look like? What are some historical modifications? How do people think about armor? And that really set me off on kind of the thread later on. So yeah, skills are important, right? But research is really that's one of the key building blocks that one of the key skills I had to develop in order to create this armor. Okay, I'm going to talk about this armor really, really fast here. Let me see if the laser pointer works. Okay, so this right here is my harness. Okay, I call it the trash can armor. Okay, I call it the trash can armor because if you are a serious reenactor, if you're like a Euro reenactor, this is not a good harness. Like I will boast and I will brag and say it's not bad, but it is definitely not good. There are many problems with this harness that any serious reenactor can see and immediately recognize. But one of the things that I pride myself on is that I modified and collected and hacked together all of these components to try to approximate something that I could fight in. Definitely I could fight in it. And it, gave me, I would say, maybe 75% of the experience of fighting in armor. It was not custom made, so there are some other issues, blah, blah, blah. But I had to acquire a lot of the fundamental skills needed to modify and maintain, and in some cases, even fabricate entirely certain pieces. 95% of this is stock. The only thing that's not stock is the gauntlets, and then the greaves I made out of boiled leather, which I do not advise other people to do. Okay, so Long Point 2019, I'm fighting in this like trash can armor I hacked together myself. So, think of like that first suit in Iron Man 1, where he comes out of the cave and he's like, fighting in this like thing that he just like hacked together and welded from some cave. I forgot what country he was in, but that's basically what I am doing. And before I did this, I knew I could not do this alone. There's no way I can do this alone. Like, first off, look at this helmet, okay? I have attached this perf plate on myself, and that is the only thing that's preventing me from blindness or death or other serious brain injury, okay? This here is a point. It's just a cord straight through two holes at the bottom of the bever, and that's because I didn't have the energy or time or skill to make a proper buckle so that things would fit properly. A lot of this is hacked together in like, semi-plausible historical-ish ways, but this is not a real suit of armor. And it is dangerous in that way. So competing in this kind of thing is dangerous. And I knew I had to develop a support team that would make sure, number one, that the armor was safe to fight in, and number two, that I could perform to the best of that harness's ability. So in addition to skills, I developed squires. My squires for Long Point 2019 were William Busher and Marlene Hurst. At the event, they helped me arm, they checked on me, made sure all of my components were in the right place, and made sure that it was safe to fight in. It really takes a load off of your mind knowing that there's someone out there looking at your harness and making sure that everything is in the right place. But not only did they perform at the event, they performed beforehand. While I was testing and fitting my armor, hacking things together, they were helping me with that. So they had seen the armor enough to recognize and know what items were out of place, if a strap is broken, they knew this thing is broken, it's no longer functioning properly. And so they were able to kind of give me the confidence to know that every time I entered the ring after I had been inspected, I was fighting with a correct set of armor. I want to point out this picture right here. So both of these pictures are by Veronique McMillan from TSG. This picture right here, I like the picture. It's really cool. Kind of the contrast in the focus is really cool. But I want to point out this little sliver of plate. It looks like plate just peeking out over my left shoulder. And you'll notice that in this picture where I have the full suit of harness, I actually have shoulder protection. In this picture right here, my spalder has been wrenched out of place. The point has been broken because of, I don't know, I assume some kind of thrust that wrenched my spalder out of place. And this is an example of the armor that kind of falls out of place in a fight. Marlene noticed this. She knew it was out of place. We cut it off and I continued fighting. That's exactly what what she was supposed to do, what squires are supposed to do. They have to know what the armor is when it's not in its correct position, and then be able to tell me that and then make modifications on the fly. So it's at this time the male sleeves, going for male sleeves instead of voiders really paid off. Anyways, the big thing here, aside from like craft, the big thing here is on methodology. I knew in the creation of the harness that I could not do it alone and that I could not perform alone. And I needed to develop people in order to do that. And so that's the seed. That right there is the seed for a lot of these later activities. And these skills here are just the tools that I use in order to get there, in order to think about how to get people to support me. Cool. All right, I'm going to check the chat real fast and hope this thing doesn't break. Okay, comment is harness is valid. Yes. Yeah, very valid. This harness is very valid. That's what I'll say. It is very valid, but by Euro standards, it's not good. I call it trash can harness so that people understand that I know what it is. Another thing I want to point out is that with trash can harness, you can do things to it that you can't do with historical harness that historically they might have done. So for example, I have no reservations with just drilling a hole into one of these pieces if I think that I need to make the modification. But if it was like a Jeff Wasson custom piece that cost as much as a car, I'm not doing that. I'm not making that modification. I'm not going to experiment with any ideas I have because the thing is just too costly to experiment with. This thing, I can buy stock, I have a few hours of time, and I can crank out and iterate on ideas very quickly. So the thinking here, again, is not about looking the part, but it's about experimentation and thinking about being able to have ideas and then test them. Okay. Okay, so we have comments in general agreement. Okay, so that forms the basic idea. So Jake and I are in discussion after Long Point 2019. I'll tell you what that discussion was about later. I just want to fast forward a little bit and just kind of hang on to this Squire thread a little bit more, just so that you can get some early insight into our reasoning. Let's see. All right, so fast forward, and we are at WMAW, which is in September of 2019. WMAW is Western Martial Arts Workshop, and it's in Racine, Wisconsin. For this event, Jake was invited to the big highlight, kind of headline deed of arms, which is like the nightly tournament. And I competed as part of a team in the quote mini deed, which, in other places might be called the Squires tournament, basically for lower ranked people with less gear, all of that stuff. So, and that like that disparity makes sense. Jake is who he is. He's very famous in HEMA circles, and I was a nobody, and kind of arguably still am. So, but this mismatch, like this mismatch is a prime opportunity. I saw this as a prime opportunity to experiment. There are a few things that I do. The first one is I offered to squire for Jake. I offered to squire for Jake, and I decided to take the role seriously. I decided to take it as seriously as I was hoping, or I was thinking, that any squire for me should operate. And that's how I approached that role. So I will talk more about squiring later on, but again, I want to point out that the big picture here is about roles and the value of methodology and thinking about roles. So I'm going to talk more about roles later on. But I just want to really go down a quick dead end and then come back to squiring. In this picture, I also decide that this is a good test ground for concealed armor. I had acquired some of the tools that I needed to start experimentation with armor. And I decided to wear a male shirt to this event. And I'm actually wearing a male shirt in this picture. I have a male shirt that basically covers my torso right here. Basically above the belt, my main torso, okay? I decided to wear it and go to this event. First off, why? Why wear a male shirt? Mainly because in reading about reading the sources, I had come across descriptions of concealed armor, and I wanted to know what that might look like. And one of the problems I found was that modern activities did not really give any context in which concealed armor might be useful or valuable. And so I decided, okay, if I'm going to look for the best modern context in which concealed armor might be tested, and I'm going to go. So at this event, I'm wearing a male shirt, and I'm surrounded by people who know what armor looks like, who know what medieval clothing looks like, and would be able to detect it if I was doing something wrong. They did not. Now, arguably, this is a modern context. No one expects me to wear armor because no one's actually trying to stab me. But it's hard for me to create that entire context completely. But the idea here is I looked and saw a gap in understanding or public knowledge, or at least my own knowledge. And I decided to try and find an activity or some small thing I could do to explore that gap in knowledge. I've since learned that a lot of people have been studying concealed armor, but I just wanted to go down this quick dead end of concealed armor and tell you that this is a very small example of the way I think about attending these kinds of events. I won't talk about this anymore. Concealed armor is a whole other topic I could continue chatting about. Back to squiring. So at this event, I squire for Jake. And, many of you might think, okay, this is squiring, so you help him get dressed. Many of you might know, like, this is the role of a squire. You help him get dressed, you help him get undressed, at least the armor part, right? But there are many other things that squires historically have done, and I wanted to think about it in its complete entirety. What does that mean? What does it mean to squire for someone? What does it mean to serve someone? And how can I, number one, do the squire job in terms of like being a support person as well as I can? And then how can I expand what being a squire might mean? Okay. So here we have two pictures. The one on the left is actually from a tournament that happened like the next month, but it's like I have the same clothing and most of the same clothing, and I'm doing the same thing. This picture is by Ian Laspina. One thing I don't like about this picture is this collar right here. This is ugly. This is not good. Hopefully any doublet I make now won't have that. Anyways, back on topic. Squiring. So number one, I want to do my job as well as I can. Number one, you get him in armor, you get him out of armor. That's easy. But the problem generally with these types of tournaments is that most of the people who squire, number one, have never worn armor before. And that's a problem. Generally, when someone gets armor and is able to fight, they get invited to these events and they're taken out of the squire pool. However, I'm now in a situation where I now have fought in armor. I know what it's like to fight in armor. I know all the bullshit that goes with it. And I have tried to train people to help me. And now I have this perfect opportunity to do the best freaking squire job I can. So what does that mean? What is the other bullshit in armor that you need to do? So here's the first thing. As soon as the match is done, you take his helmet, you pop his visor, and you take off the helmet, you take off the gloves. That's the first thing after each bout or each exchange or any situation in which he's temporarily for more than 20 seconds going to be standing still. That's because the visor is awful, right? And you're thinking about ways in order to improve his performance, both competitively, and then later on I'll talk about what it means socially. Other things I do is I go and I bend down, and if he drops something, like if he's fighting and he drops a weapon, I run there, I pick up his weapon and give it to him. I do this without being told because I already know that if you're in armor, you don't want to bend over and pick things up. And so I need to do that without being told because that's my job. Like that's my job, and it took a little bit of mental work to get in that place, to get in the place where I have to understand, okay, I need to do things without being told. I need to offer things and keep track of things without having to be told, because it's the modern Charles that has objections to that kind of thing. Generally, modern people are not used to serving other people in a personal capacity. So, and they're not used to being served. So for example, the top 0.1% of people will have, in terms of wealth, will have personal secretaries, personal assistants, butlers, cooks, maids, these types of things where you have an individual devoted towards your service. I don't have any of those. I interact with people who do, and so I get a little insight into how they act and how these types of assistant personnel, support personnel, interact and reflect the status of their principal. and how they're generally expected to do things without being told. They have to anticipate the needs of the person they're serving and then be there. So in this experiment, it actually has happened over two events. I squire, I do the traditional things that, kind of inexperienced squires would do, but I'm also providing water for him without being asked. When I take off all of his stuff, his helmet and his gauntlets, I keep track of it. I keep track of it so that he can focus just on whatever it is that he wants to accomplish at the tournament. For me, I had to do some introspection and think, okay, I'm Jake. Like, suppose I'm modern Jake. What do I want to do? Modern Jake wants to compete in a tournament and he wants to chat with his friends. Those are probably the two things. That's not too far off from historical Jake, right? In the historical fiction that we're setting up, he's in a medieval tournament. He wants to compete. He wants to do well, and he wants to socialize with his friends, and he wants to look good while doing it. So the main physical things I'm doing is keeping track of all the bullshit. I won't go too far into it. I don't want to talk too long about it, but I'm keeping track of all the bullshit, and making sure that he can focus on his job, which is fighting in armor. Over here, we have him talking with Roland of Vardsek. I'm totally butchering his name. I'm sorry, but I'm making sure he looks good too. So when I take off his helmet, I give him his hat so he can wear his hat. And this way he doesn't have to, he can look good while he's sitting around. Those are small touches that I thought about what a squire might do, and I just did them, not because Jake asked me to, but because I thought about the role and took it seriously. Okay. So this concludes the squire section, right? And it's kind of a mini experiment I run at events that I go to. And it really highlights what I think is the methodology and the idea, the concept of taking a role seriously and thinking about what your objectives are within that role. During that time, Jake and we did not speak to each other in like shitty Shakespearean English or whatever. We just knew what our roles were and we did them as well as we could. And so we didn't need to insert any weird social stuff, any weird social conventions into it. We know what the roles are. And this allowed us to experiment with what the maximum capability of harness is when you have proper support. Okay, I'm going to use this opportunity to stop, check chat, and see what's going on. Okay, all right. I didn't see any, but I might not have checked that well. Okay.
No questions of note yet.
What's that?
I said no questions of note yet.
Okay, good. Cool. So, I've got to move. Yep, I do have to move. All right. So, in the background of this, Jake and I are talking about, we're griping. This started as a gripe session about all the work that goes into a HEMA camping event, the logistical challenge of bringing all of your stuff to an event, finding food, setting up all your tents, all of that stuff, and then having to bring it home and clean it. So you have to bring camping gear, fencing gear, you have to find food, you have to set up camp, you have to clean all the shit afterwards. That's a huge problem. And we thought to ourselves, wouldn't it be great if we had people that could support us in that endeavor, right? And so that is like the kind of modern gripe that led and that became the seed for the lance. And so the lance, as people probably have referred to it, I'll elaborate on the lance terminology later, but the lance, as we initially thought of it, was a small military unit of some kind. There's an outdoor excursion. I'm avoiding the use of the word camping, but we initially thought of it as like a medieval military camping outing. And we would try to explore the military context of KDF or even just military units generally. And what we would do is we would recruit friends to serve in this lance and to help ease the logistical burdens of that outing. So recruit friends. So the idea was with like, for example, with Will and Marlene, I asked them, hey, can you, help me out with these things? And I also made sure when I when they were squiring for me, to make sure that they got something out of it. So I tried to invite them to the back rooms so that they could, see all of the harness that was in the tournament up close and interact with kind of the people there, because they're really cool people and they're good to know. So, we recruit friends to serve, but there's also some degree of exchange, which I'll talk about later. But this is kind of the initial conception of the lance. I'm going to talk more about sources for lances, like what actually it is and what it's not. But I want to give you a quote that is like really resonated, I think, with both Jake and me. Here it is. It's super long, but I'm just going to read the entire thing out and then kind of talk through it. It serves as the inspiration for at least the Lance outings. All right. They are not all good knights who ride upon horses. Neither are they all knights to whom kings give arms. Oh, my window's in the way. There we go. They have the name, but they do not pursue the calling. For since noble knighthood is of all offices the most honorable, all men desire to be uplifted to this honor. They wear the mantle and bear the name, but they do not observe the rule of life. They are not knights, but phantoms and apostates. The cowl does not make the monk, but the monk the cowl. Many are called and few chosen. There is not, and there should be in no way, I think it's ways be, among all estates, an estate honored as is this, since those of common and mean estate eat their bread at ease. They have soft garments and savory meats, easy and scented beds. They go to sleep in peace and arise without fear, enjoy their pleasures in fair houses with their wives and children, and with many men to do their will. They become thick-necked and paunchy. They love their little bodies and cherish them delicately and live in delight. What guerdon, which is a reward, or what honors do they deserve? None, nay, none. So I'm going to break here. This first part is just him complaining about how soft people are today, or how soft these fake soldiers, fake knights are. The second part is a little different. Knights who are at wars eat their bread in sorrow. Their ease is weariness and sweat. They have one good day after many bad. They are vowed to all manner of labor. They are forever swallowing their fear. They expose themselves to every peril. They give up their bodies to the adventure of life in death. Moldy bread or biscuit, meat cooked or uncooked, today enough to eat and tomorrow nothing, little or no wine, water from a pond or a butt, which is a cask, bad quarters, the shelter of a tent or branches, a bad bed, poor sleep with their armor still on their backs, burdened with iron, the enemy an arrow shot off. Where? Who goes there? To arms, to arms. With the first drowsiness, an alarm. At dawn, the trumpet. To horse, muster, muster. As lookouts, as sentinels, keeping watch by day and by night, fighting without cover, as foragers, as scouts, guard after guard, duty after duty. Here they come, here. They are so many. No, not as many as that. This way, that. Come this side, press them there. News, news. They come back hurt. They have prisoners. No, they bring none back. Let us go. Give no ground. On. Such is their calling, a life of great fatigues, bereft of all ease. So this quote is by I believe it's the squire for a 14th century Portuguese knight. If not Portuguese, then certainly Iberian. He's either Spanish or Portuguese. But this is a quote by his squire in in the biography of Don Peronino, who is the knight. And I see this quote in two phases. The first one is his complaints about fake soldiers or fake knights. And it's hard for me to determine to what extent this is actually true, or whether this is just kind of the universal gripe that people have, that people are soft nowadays, right? So it's kind of like a universal thing throughout time that, soldiers are always going to complain that other soldiers are fake and soft, and the real hardcore ones were way back in some past time. So I don't know to what extent that explains factual reality. But the second one is very interesting in the sense that it gives us a window into what his conception of being a knight actually was, and it's very different from the nightly discussion that we see even in HEMA circles, in harness festen circles. The nightly tournament and chivalric discussion discussions of chivalry, it's not here. There's no tournament here. There's barely any fencing. You're going to get shot by an arrow while you fall asleep on your watch, and you know, you drank shitty water from a pond. This is not a glamorous depiction, and yet seems more real. This seems to be a very realistic or grounded description of what knights who are at the wars are expected to do. And basically, this quote forms that inspiration. Later on, we find many more examples of what the conduct of knights at war actually looks like. And, you know, it's more of this, more hardship, you know, watch, foraging, alarms, worrying about being shot by arrows, not enough food, all of this stuff. This is really helps form our mindset when we think about the lance. Okay, I'm gonna stop and take. Okay, I don't have enough time to read that. Okay, so this quote is our inspiration. I'm gonna rewind now. Okay, so like the previous slide looked like this here. We had this concept, this seed of an idea of a lance, right? And we had an inspiration. This quote is our inspiration, but we have to rewind a bit and think, okay, what is a lance, right? Historically, what is a lance? The answer is, it really depends. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few examples of lances and then kind of lead you to our basic conclusion and then some problems. What is a lance? So first, France, 1445, a lance is a man-at-arms with a retinue of a page or squire, 2 or 3 archers, and a coutelier. Coutelier is something like literally, I think it's dagger man, but a coutelier is kind of like a brigand. It's like, I would say medium cavalry, or perhaps medium mounted infantry. But basically not someone in full harness who's going to charge with the lance. This is someone who has a degree of substantial armor, but is not doing the man-at-arms thing. Burgundy, 1471. A lance is 1 mounted man-at-arms with a mounted page and a coutelier, 3 mounted archers, and 1 crossbowman, handgunner, and pikeman on foot. So the Burgundian lance of 1471 is a monster. It's 9 people. Okay, this is definitely the outlier, but people glom onto Burgundian descriptions because they're very well documented. They have a lot of ordinances. German-speaking lands. In Swabia, it's 4 horses. In Nuremberg, it's 2 horses to 1 spear. Strasbourg, 5 horses to 1 glaive, and Regensburg, 1 spear and 1 marksman with 3 horses. So first off, these are secondary sources. So I should go back and do the work to look through what the specific context of these sources. I actually don't have dates for these, but it's very interesting to me that these are all, that German lances are couched in a certain way. They describe the number of horses, and they don't even tell us how many people that are in these lances. So it's a little bit iffy, whether it's a little bit unclear. Like when they mean 4 horses, do they mean 4 men with horses, or do they mean we don't really care about how many people you have, we just want to know that there are this many horses? I think it's the former rather than the latter, but that's going to require more work to verify. Okay, so here are 3 examples of lances. It varies significantly. And these are mid and late 15th century examples. You know, whatever bullshit you've heard about, like a lance being like a knight and a squire and a page, and the squire becomes a knight at a certain age, and then a page becomes a squire at a certain age. Just forget that. Just pretend you never learned it, and don't talk about that in a serious way with anyone. Okay, a lance, to our understanding, seems to be a small unit that has the support for a man-at-arms, and then it might have other soldiers. It might have infantry, it might have mounted infantry, it might have mounted archers. The only thing we can really say about a lance is that it has 1 man-at-arms, and it has the required support to field that man-at-arms, and then it might have a bunch of other people. But a lance with 2 men-at-arms is actually 2 lances. Okay, each lance has 1 man-at-arms, the support for that man-at-arms, and then everyone else. Okay, so that's right now, as of right now, that's our conception of a lance. It's very loose, right? Not only that, it's loose because these recorded descriptions of lances might not be descriptive, but rather prescriptive. A lot of these, so for example, the first two I know for sure are from ordinances, and these are rules that are describe minimum standards for a lance. So, if your lance does not have these components, we're not going to pay you. Burgundy, 1471. So this admits the possibility, of course, that a lance is actually more than 9 people, which is just terrifying to me. But I'm not going to go there. We're going to bring along the people that we have. German-speaking lands seem to have smaller lances, anywhere from 2 to 5 people. That seems to be a reasonable size for a lance. And we're gonna stop there. We're not going to think too much about armament. We're going to think mainly about support for the men at arms, and then thinking about the use of arms for everyone else. Okay. But there are problems. There are methodological problems when we do this, when we go out as a 5-person or 4 or 5-person group and start to do things. Okay, so here are some problems. The first one is that there is no evidence that a lance is a tactical unit. There's no, so what do I mean by that? I've read sources. I cannot find a description where anyone says, hey, you take your lance and go and fight that group of people. That's just not a thing that happens, right? And you would, and the modern temptation is to graft the description of a lance into that of like a squad, right? Take your squad, hold that hill. That's not something that seems to be in sources. There's no description of like, take your lance, hold that hill, take a lance, do this patrol. The only description of lances that we find are in descriptions of larger units. This company has 100 lances. This squadron has 10 lances, and that's it. And as far as we can tell, in terms of depictions of soldiers, so for example, this example here, as far as we can tell, you arrive with your lance, but once you arrive at your company or squadron or battle or whatever the name is for your larger unit, it depends on region, they take that lance and they split them up. And they split them up kind of as you see here. We have infantry with pole arms, we have missile infantry right here, we've got guns, we've got crossbows, and then at the back we have cavalry. At the front, we have, scouts and officers and musicians. Just a quick side note, these guys have a ton of guns. Like right here in these units right here, it's like 75% guns. And this is 1480. Wild, right? Anyways, the main problem here is that the lance is not a tactical unit. It's purely administrative. And when five dudes go out into the wilderness and try to do something, we're not actually doing the thing, and we can't avoid that. So I'm going to show you some videos of us doing drill or marching, and I want you to take it with a grain of salt. I want you to remember that what you're seeing is not our actual attempt at the thing, but rather it's the small scale version. We can only do a small scale version. I'd like to get to a point where I have a whole company of people to experiment with. I don't want to say command because I'm just normal Charles. I get to experiment with people. I'd like a company of people to experiment with. When that happens, we will do this. This here, split up the lances into their unit types, and do it in the way that they did it historically. But the only problem is now we only have 5 people. So, we're going to just do what we can with the number of people that we have. I'll point out when you should try to look past the video, look past the imagery and kind of infer different things. Okay. The second problem is that, as far as we can tell, you are fighting, like nearly any late medieval military unit is predominantly horse-based. Either you are riding a horse or your stuff, your baggage is in a wagon that is being pulled by a horse. So that presents problems. I don't have a horse. Jake doesn't have a horse. None of the people we worked with had a horse. And so what that means is we cannot answer these types of questions. The general methodology here, or the overarching principle then, is to answer the questions that you can answer when you have good tools. If you have good tools to answer a very limited question, answer the limited question. Don't try to bullshit some kind of bigger thing. The way that I conceive of the things that we do is that there are examples. There are examples of tactical movement on foot. So you'd have soldiers, they'd ball up in these little groups, and then they'd go out and they'd fight the enemy. You'd have these cavalrymen over here. There are situations in which it's more prudent for them to dismount, ball up just like these infantry, and fight. And there are situations in which it's more prudent for them to dismount and go and scout, to go through rough terrain. So that is what we can explore. We cannot explore situations where we actually have cavalry, right? And we don't have wagons and horses. So we can't actually explore those ideas. We can't have that kind of baggage train. Maybe someday, maybe if we find some kind of super rich patron. It's at this moment I want to push back on what I've seen some people do. Some people, when they get into this reenactment thing, they start to recreate foot long distance foot marches, right? So instead of this wagon here, you load up people with backpacks and hand carts. And think about long distance movement on foot while you have arms and armor. As far as I can tell, this isn't a thing. And my kind of curt way of putting it is that if you're too poor to afford a horse, like even collectively as a group of infantry, then you are too poor to fight. Like that's kind of the thing. It's like you're too poor to even arrive at the battlefield on time and in a condition to fight. And so my critique of that approach is that these are people who are trying to get reach for immersion for an event from start to end. From start to finish, they want to feel immersed. But I would avoid that kind of thing. I would avoid leaning too hard into thinking about medieval backpacking or medieval hand carts. We don't see them in sources. And I think it's trying to solve a modern problem, which is that we don't have horses, or solve a modern problem, which is that we want our immersion throughout the entire weekend with what we think is a medieval solution. And, if you're in it for immersion, more power to you. But I don't want to put any more effort into that because I don't think it solves any historical questions I'm interested in. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here, double check chat, make sure.
We do have a couple of questions. So if you want, okay. I can go through. So the first one's from Michael Chinister. I'm sorry if I got that name wrong. I cannot remember. Didn't we create a narrative that we were working on how the lance would operate on the way to from muster when we weren't part of a larger army?
Yeah, that was one of the stories we told ourselves. And that's actually one of the things that we could have potentially I think that was a little bit Weasley. I'm not 100% sold on that. But I think that's the best narrative that would be consistent with the entire picture that we painted. But in my heart of hearts, I don't know. I haven't seen any accounts of how these lances are traveling. These lances could even just be mustered as entire units, right? And they could just be administrative units of measurement. I don't know. And I'm really hoping that someone is watching this who has a huge, a great command of the sources and can leap in and just tell me I'm wrong in some way. But the story that would not break immersion is that we're a lance, we're traveling from A to B so that we can be with our company. And we need to, pull watch, and we need to make sure we're not ambushed on the way. And my actual internal struggle is whether that's actually a thing. And it could be that a lance is an administrative unit of measurement and lances don't actually move somewhere. In the sources, in discussions of military conflict in the late medieval period, they just refer to the number of people. They'll say, take 6 men and go there, or take your company and go there. They don't refer to lances as some unit that moves around. So yeah, like a economic unit of measurement. Yeah, that's definitely that's a possibility I'm toying with. And so I have a lot of uncertainty about that kind of since our excursion, which I will talk about, since our excursion in May of this year, I really haven't found anything that gives me more faith in that. All right, another question.
Thank you. So we have another one. I think this might be just a quick one. Pradana says, wait, I recognize that wordinger thing. Is that from a footnote in Delph?
I don't know, actually. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Wait, yes, it's a footnote in Delbrook. Yes, sorry, I didn't hear that. Delbrook. It's in Delbrook. I need to follow up on that. But right now, the working hypothesis, again, I'm trying to, at the meta level, I'm trying to have kind of the veneer of scientific thought. But the idea is that the working hypothesis is, just a unit. A lance is a man at arms, the support they need, and then whatever soldiers we want to attach to it. Seems there's a bunch of variety of lance sizes, but I don't think that there's much to be gained by getting very specific in the size of a lance. We can talk later because I do need someone to hunt down and go through Verdinger and actually just trawl through Delbrook. Cool.
That's all the questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. So those are the problems, and kind of we did have stories for why we don't have horses or why we're operating as a lance. But these are big problems. These are methodological problems that we're going to have to work on. We're going to have to continue to work on and think about like what kinds of questions we can actually solve. We can actually provide reasonable answers for. Yeah, so basically in terms of the logistics, we start thinking about how we're going to get people. And from this, when we're creating the lance or thinking about how it might operate, we think we come up with, and this is my name, like Jake hasn't named this and I should have run it by him first, but we have this idea of a service exchange model, where you come serve us, right? And you have a role and you have responsibilities. And we give you a lot of stuff, or we lend to you a lot of stuff. You get a uniform, you get equipment. So we lend you equipment in order to play the part if you don't have it. Provisions, we feed you. And you get status, and the status is whatever status you can derive from that thing. So within some circles, what we're doing is pretty rare and exclusive, and it's like a really cool opportunity. And then it's also a way to feel like you're part of a bigger thing, a bigger group. And so those three things line up more or less with my understanding of kind of the nature of service in the period. Of course, with some variation. Sometimes it's more mercenary. Sometimes there's less of a notion of being within a household. Got a chat here. Yeah, basically the bastard feudalism. Yes. I don't want to use feudalism too much, but this is the service exchange. Yeah, the idea of service in exchange for a bunch of things is very close to the notion of service at the time. Money is frequently a part of this, is usually a part of it. You pay your retainers. We didn't. It kind of changes things. And so that's one thing, it's in red because that's something we did not provide. Something that we did provide that is not historic is immersion. Immersion is a powerful tool. It's a reward. So a lot of people do similar activities, camp in the woods in armor, for that kind of immersion. And I'm not going to pretend it's not something that is valuable to people. And so when you go on these trips, if you come serve us, there are moments where you will feel immersed, and they are valuable. I'll point to a few times that I think I'm probably going to remember until I die. All right. Yeah. Okay. And so one of the things I want to point out here is that immersion is not immersion is not our goal. Like I'm not going to put in significant amounts of effort to make sure that you're immersed from like point A to point B, like from start to end. Immersion is just going to be a side effect of the things that we do. And you know, it's also kind of an ancillary reward to participating in this activity. But it's not our primary goal. Our primary goal is to some kind of question, get some kind of answer. All right, so let me take you to the first outing. The first outing is in October 2019. I'm getting pretty slow, so I'm going to have to speed this up a little bit. But this is perhaps the most interesting to most people and yet least on topic for me for this talk. So our first outing is October 2019. There's Jake. There's me in my trash can armor. Okay. There's Kiana Shurkin as our page and servant. And there's Ben Michaels, also a servant, but his responsibilities were primarily cooking, foraging, and hunting. Some of the main activities we did, we set up camp. We kept watch throughout the night in the first night. We started fires with flint and steel. We had to figure out how we're going to handle weapons. So when we were in camp, we carried sidearms the entire time. When we left camp, we had more substantial weapons. And we also did a short patrol. So I'll, you know, keeping, so I put stars next to the things I want to go further into, because I could just talk for hours about all of these things. But keeping watch, we kept watch for the first night, and we had to figure out how we were going to keep time. We had to figure out what exactly we were watching for. And I think I just want to mention that this is where the methodology and the ability to take a role seriously really shines, because we kept watch even though we knew that there was essentially nothing going to attack us, barring some kind of wild animal. But we had to keep watch as if there was. So that means staying awake, kind of walking back and forth, making sure that, you know, nothing would sneak up on us or, you know, the people inside the tent. And it takes a degree of discipline and clarity in the objective of the entire event to do that kind of thing without there being something that would actually attack us, either in reality or in whatever game we conjure. So, you know, one could imagine a further game where we invent antagonists who try to sneak up on us at night. That is, it's dangerous, it's cumbersome. Maybe we could do it in the future, but being able to just take a role seriously and dive into it is can still get us pretty far. Second thing I want to talk about is the patrol. I have a short clip here that I want to show you. I hope this video works. Okay. This is just a short clip of our first patrol. We were encountering a short bridge. Jake is in front. He's in full harness with a spear. I am in 3/4 harness with a poleaxe. Kiana is at the back with her javelins and our water, and Ben Michaels is filming. We reach this crossing, heads on a swivel, looking around, pretending as if we could get ambushed at any point, and a bridge is a great choke point with which to ambush someone. And there's not much after that, but that's basically what it looks like out in the woods, patrolling, looking around, poking our heads through bushes, trying to, you know, take the role seriously. The last thing I want to point out is that this trip was super cold. Let me actually rewind a little bit. This trip was really cold. It was October 2019. So it's October in Pennsylvania, and the temperatures dipped to like low 40s. Thankfully, it was dry. More on that later. But it was cold. I think out of all of the experiments, all the Lance outings, the person who suffered the most was Kiana. Kiana suffered the most out of all of these things. She had to keep watch the first night, and I did not make cloaks. I did not understand this. I thought the wool that I had given people would be sufficient. It was not. And so Kiana kept watch with 2 blankets at night. just in the dark, in the woods. We didn't have a fire because of course you're not gonna have a fire if you're keeping watch. You know, she's wearing this helmet. This helmet here is 6 pounds. Pretty much any soldier I talked to would not wear a 6-pound helmet. And she did not complain. I did not hear her complain once. Like, this is just crazy. Kiana suffered the most, did not hear a single complaint. Just great, you know, a shout out to Kiana. But the broad picture, the broad kind of point is that this outing was cold. It got into the low 40s, not lethal, but just unpleasant. And so that kind of informed my thinking for the next outing. And so from this, we learned a lot, and we're thinking about preparations. Oh, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to change things? And, you know, we get really psyched and amped up, and then COVID hits, right? COVID hits, you know, early 2020, right? So we were thinking, okay, in March or April or May, we'd be able to try this again, but a pandemic hits. And so we need to figure out, you know, whether we can continue. During the pandemic, nothing happens. You know, there's no HEMA, or at least most of 2020, there's no HEMA. There's none of this, certainly. I'm not going to be in a bunch, like an enclosed tent with a bunch of people. You know, I have a lot of time to just do nothing, right? Or actually to do stuff. I actually make a bunch of stuff. And by like make a bunch of stuff, I mean like a bunch of stuff, like a shit ton of stuff. I explore all sorts of weird stuff. And this talk is not about craft or making things. It's about methodology and answering questions. And so really, I see all of this as a separate project, but it's also providing the tools to be able to answer questions later on. I make a lot of stuff, clothing, mail. Basically, you take all the skills I developed at Long Point 2019 and you just inject hours and hours of time into it, right? And isolation and, you know, a little bit of mental fatigue into it, okay? I'm not going to talk too much about this. The things that I'm mainly proud of are this jack right here. This is a 31 plus layer jack, and it's got 85 in the center. It's just an obscene beast. That I'm proud of. This male collar, it's got a 6-in-1 weave in the neck. Well, kind of a hybrid, 6-in-1, 4-in-1, but like it's got a very dense weave in the neck that's not recreated generally. Usually you have to be very specialized individuals to pull this kind of thing off. And then also this modern plate carrier. It's a modern piece of armor with medieval aesthetics. So generally I'm playing with the creation of objects, creation of armor, and playing with aesthetics. That's it. You know, like this is the pandemic kind of montage where I have nothing to do but just hone my skills. That's it. I have a bunch of stuff now. After this, like we fast forward, I've got a bunch of stuff that I can just hand out now, or I know how to fabricate, you know, late 15th century German attire. And if I need to outfit a lance, I can do that after this intermission. All right, cool. All right, I'm going to talk really quickly. Okay, so did Jake discuss the modern cross the danger area battle drill in relation to that bridge crossing? No, we didn't. I think we did later on. There is a passage from Le Jouvencel that describes that exact thing. I'm not 100% clear on modern doctrine, but I believe it's actually pretty close to this. But in Le Jouvencel, which is a late 15th century French biography, or kind of like disguised biography of a French knight, he gives advice on how to cross danger areas or closed off obstacles. He says, send, you know, several of your good men forward, leave another good man with the main body, and then, you know, scout it out. And then when they come back and tell you it's all clear, you can all move forward. Okay. Yep. Michael says we tried hard not to fall into US Army battle drills and medieval clothing. That's important. And, you know, to the extent that we can, I am very interested in modern doctrine in terms of identifying gaps in our understanding, or providing more questions about modern, providing more questions about how things might have been done historically. Okay, this is very long, so I will have to read that later. Sorry, Pradana. Okay, so COVID happens, and fast forward to May 2021. And we assemble a new group, or rather Jake assembles a new group, and this is what we look like. Okay, so that's Michael Chittister, he's here. Will Busher, he's here. Jake, he's probably asleep because he's in the Netherlands. There's me. Also, I will point out I did not bring my trash can armor, or I only brought a few components of it. My harness is improved, but I've hidden it under, livery. I've hidden it under a bunch of stuff. And then there's Sigmund Verndorf over here. Yeah, so we do a few things. Again, the idea of this is an outing, right? And there are a few new things. Because there isn't a fire advisory during this time, we do campfire cooking. So Sigmund here did the campfire cooking in a cast iron pot, which took hours of time. And so, like, huge thanks to him. His food was delicious. He even gave us this wonderful cheese presentation, kind of his best attempts to reconstruct what like historical cheese might have been. And I, during that presentation, I forgot I was lactose intolerant until like an hour later, in which I had a horrible time. So we did campfire cooking. That was great. We also have livery, as you can see. I'm going to talk more about that because that's kind of related to the skills and the tools I developed developed earlier. We have livery, so we look the part. We have a uniform appearance, and these outfits are designed to look like those from the Wolfegg Housebook. So again, we're aiming for 1470 to 1480 Southern Germany. We conduct a few drills, just a few basic ideas that are historically inspired based on specific sources. I'll read that and show you a short clip of that. And we run a short patrol. The story we tell ourselves is that we're going to raid a bandit base, and we need to go there on foot because it's in the mountains. And, we get there, clear it out, destroy it, do whatever. And then, this trip is cold and rainy. It sucked. More on that later. Okay, so I want to talk about livery first. So livery made it special, I think, or it had a tangible psychological effect. Michael has this quote, or he said it. He said, he'll have to correct me if I quoted him wrong, but there's something magical about uniforms. And 100% agree. I 100% agree that there was something magical about uniforms, about us all wearing the same clothing. So first off, we have Will here looking very German with his kettle hat. And this is the Wolfegg Housebook kind of look. A pleated livery, baggy sleeves. That's about it. This is made in a very heavy wool, which is very nice. One thing we noticed is that, having everyone dress identically made us feel like we were closer to each other. It bonded us together as a group, and it made us feel like we were working towards some kind of common objective. And then there were moments when your livery's off and it felt like it was break time and you could kind of do your own thing. But once we all had our liveries on, something in our brain changed. Another thing that I want to point out is that liveries also, they hide the ugly, right? And I mean this both in the modern and the historical sense. So in the modern sense, liveries conceal kit that is not that is not either historical or that is just not of high quality. So in this example here, Michael here, he's wearing his cloak. He didn't have as much of the stuff, like the stuff that reenactors love to collect. But we wanted him in our group because of who he is and the things he could provide to us in terms of, knowledge of sources and kind of a deep knowledge of how to find source material. And also as a conduit, as kind of our hype man later on. But here he is, he's with us, and most of his stuff is covered up. Like you'd have to look pretty hard and notice, certain things that were off, but he looks the part, he fits in. And I would say it's a 75 to 80% job to get him there. And, he looks presentable on the outside, especially for, being able to bring someone in who doesn't want to invest the time into sewing their own clothing or purchasing their own things. That's very important and valuable to me, that we're able to bring in people who don't necessarily want to drop the money or time in acquiring stuff. So in the modern context, livery is valuable in that it conceals the ugly. But then also in the historical context, it does the same thing. You bring in retainers, into your household. You want them to look nice. Here, put this over your shitty clothes, and you are instantly elevated. You're elevated and you are included in part of the group. Yeah. All right, cool. So livery is an important part. It helps form the visual impression of the group. So just rewinding a little bit. If we rewind and look at the outer components here, the things that I had to make were the hoods, cloaks, and livery for everyone. And the helmets are loaners. Well, that one's mine, of course, but like these are all my helmets, but I've loaned them out so that we can look the part. And so basically with something on your torso and something on your head, and if the thing has sleeves, you basically look the part, provided that you're not wearing something that's too out of place. Right, so that's livery. Next, I'll talk about drill. I'm going to show you a short clip of some drills that we did, and then I'm going to read the source that inspired us, and then I'll also talk about some other sources we found later that I would like to say we knew about before we did this, but we didn't. We found them afterwards. Okay. All right, here we go. This is us pretending like we're on some patrol. Sigmund's in front scouting. Sigmund spots someone, a horse, and we close ranks. I want to point out how densely packed in we are here. I'll come back to that, but we are slamming our bodies into each other, and we're trying to present a high density of spears in a single area. Basically, where Jake is pointing his spear, we want all of our spears in that high density area, like a very dense area. We call out a command and we try to encircle someone whose horse has balked or is still turning. Basically, we present the hedgehog of spears, and then we try to encircle a horse that is a little bit too slow to turn around or is about to throw its rider. All right, another portion of the drill, walking along here. Turning in small units, trying to keep that high density of spears. And then converting into spears facing outwards. Oh, sorry, this is going back to where it was. Okay. All right, I'm gonna pause right here to give you a quick reminder, again, that what you're seeing is not the real thing and not our attempt at the real thing. We are too small a unit. The fiction we could tell ourselves is that perhaps we're a small unit and we are traveling from one place to another as a lance. Maybe, I like that. I like that. It doesn't break immersion. On the other hand, I think what I'd really like to do is practice this with a larger group. I don't really care if they all have kit or not, but I'd like to do this with 20 or 30 people. These maneuvers, I'm pretty sure, don't necessarily scale to larger groups, especially the turn. But we experiment, we're playing with this, and a lot of what's going on here is Cunningham's law. For those of you who don't know, Cunningham's law is basically, if you post a wrong answer on the internet, you'll get the correct answer faster than if you just ask a question. And so by posting something that looks sexy and kind of fires the imagination, we're going to drag out the people who have the sources and want to just, pour water over other people's fires, they'll give us the correct sources. And so a lot of our experimentation is with that in mind, that we're probably not doing it right, but someone's going to swoop in and tell us how wrong we're doing it and what the right way to do it is. Okay, here's the last part of our drill. Same scenario. Sigmund in front as scout. We see someone in front. We close ranks, form a hedgehog. Now Jake is moving us non-verbally. He's not even telling us what he's doing. We're taking cues off of his movement and adjusting the formation to where it needs to be. All the information travels through Fulin and body contact as we maintain a wedge formation. He does an action, I do an action, and then Sigmund does an action. This information travels down the line. Highly speculative. Okay, so and then we charge. So there's a detail where as we charge, Michael starts to fall a little bit behind. That's actually in sources. They basically say if you try to charge in closed ranks over ground, your formation will break up and then you'll be destroyed. You'll be defeated in detail, I think is the modern term. All right, so I'm going to read you a source that inspired this, so that you know that we had a germ of an idea here. This is from, okay, this picture is going to crop it. Okay, so this is from Le Jouvencel, which is a late 15th century autobiography of sorts, but also kind of like a tutorial for how to be a knight. This is a recent translation, so most people haven't read it yet, but it's got lots of good stuff that I'm still trying to mine. Here's the quote. As I've said in more detail already in this book, any army should divide its ranks into a number of battles, but when the battles are echelons, or squadroni, as they say in Italian, whatever you like to call them, then each battle echelon or squadrone should close ranks as far as possible. I myself have heard people say, seeing an army launch an attack, that it's a fine sight. You'd have been able, in the case of a smaller party, to cover them with a cloth. If you'd thrown an apple at the vanguard, it'd have been caught on a lance. The same with each of the battles, small and large. All the best captains will say, as battle is about to be joined, close ranks. And I refer you to Lahire, doctor in the science of war, which is a degree I'd like to pursue. That's my commentary. He took part in all the wars in France and always said just that as battle was imminent. The idea of closing ranks and presenting a high density of spears was the inspiration for these types of drills. Later on, we discovered in a manuscript of Bellafortis just these types of reaction to contact drills, which is, to use the modern terminology, but basically saying, you should practice marching, and then if you meet the enemy, you should shout "in die Ordnung," which is essentially like get in formation and get into a tight ball. I have to go and double check the quote on that one. We're still working on finding a decent translation of that one. But yeah, that's the drill that we did. I think it's super sexy. I haven't shown this to anyone outside of our group. No one has seen this yet. So you all are the first to have seen this. I have leaked a bunch of stuff, but this I haven't shown to anyone yet. All right, let's go see the chat here. Yeah. Argue against too small. Good. All right. I do not have the brain power to check this out, but yeah. So at the end, I'll take more questions on this. I'm trying to finish within, a reasonably quick amount of time. So I'm hoping to finish in the next 15 minutes, and then I will stay until people stop asking me questions. Okay. So that's just to let you know, I will keep answering questions. All right. So those are the drills. The last thing we did was we did a march. The setup was, actually, let me just let you watch it. There's Sigmund scouting for us. There's the rest of the main body. There's me as a couturier in 3/4 harness. There's Jake, who's been making this racket. There's Will and Michael in the back, who was carrying an ungodly amount of weight up a mountain. All right, so let me explain it. I just wanted you to watch it with like not too much commentary. But the basic story we told ourselves is that there was a bandit base, and our job was to do a patrol, get to the bandit base, kill whoever's inside or burn it, and then come back. We didn't actually get there that far, more on why we didn't, but we got most of the way there. We got about 90% of the way there. We turned around because we were worried about the amount of daylight left. This is kind of the high point of immersion. It's very immersive. This is actually one of those things. This is one of those things I'm going to remember for the rest of my life, how I felt at that time. Marching through the mountains in the mist with a small unit. We look at each other and we're immersed, right? Because of our uniforms, we're reminded that we all have this common purpose and we're here to do the thing, and we do the thing, and it's cool outside and we look cool and everyone looks cool, and it's just amazing. That is one of the rewards of that service exchange, that you get that immersion, but it's not the main goal. The main goal is to answer questions. And the question was, is it really feasible to move on foot? What kind of support is necessary? Can we do it well? And can we arrive in shape in order to, like in shape, able to fight after, you know, not that long a distance, but some distance, right? To travel some distance that I think most people who own harness generally do not walk unsupported. So this overall hike was, I think, 4.5 or 5 miles, and we had about maybe 600, maybe 700 feet of altitude climb, which was unpleasant, not too bad, but by the end of it, were it not for the daylight, we felt like we could have continued a lot longer. And so that's where a lot of my current experiments are running towards. But I just wanted to show you that. I want to point out how cool it is, how immersive it is. I'm pretty sure everyone who attended who was there is going to remember that for the rest of their life. But I also want to point out that's not what we're after. That's a byproduct of trying to answer the question faithfully. That's really the key point of my methodology. And that's where I differ from a lot of other HEMA adjacent activities that people might be interested in. All right. Oh, turn up the volume, folks. Half the fun is the clanking. Yeah. So again, I want to point out, so this was a really cool weather. I'm just going to play it again just so people can, but I'll talk over it. The weather was really cool. It's really misty. It's super immersive. It looks like we're out of like some kind of, I don't know, indie band or something, but like we emerged from the mist. We passed a few AT hikers that I'm sure probably thought they were hallucinating. But this mist is only possible because of how cold and rainy it was the day before. Continue to talk. I only have a few more slides left. But it was cold and rainy. We actually had to bail on the second night. So the first night we came in, we suffered. We went in the bed, like we slept in our bed, or I slept in a cot. Will and Sigmund slept, I want to say in the mud. I mean, maybe not literally in the mud, but they were sleeping on the ground. They had like modern camping mats, but they were on the ground and it did not look that great. And in the tent, it's not a waterproof fabric. It's water resistant. And so rain is falling on us. And we're just soaking wet and cold for the first night. Second night, we decided to bail. We head to the shittiest hotel we could find in the area. Let me head back here. We head to the shittiest hotel we could find in the area. Hotel we could find in the area, and we decided to sleep, get dry, and the next day retackle kind of this retackle our objectives to go on this patrol. So the patrol that you saw that's so immersive, I would say was only really possible because we had bailed the previous day. If we had stayed the night, the temperatures dipped into the high 30s. The high 30s, it's May in Virginia, and it's in the high 30s and raining the entire weekend. This was even worse. I prepared for this event thinking that October's weather was the worst it could get, and it actually got even worse. We had to bail, and I'm sure Jake is not happy about that, and partially I'm also not happy about that, but I'm sure he wanted to rough it, kind of in the army way. But you know, we had other objectives too, right? And so sometimes the right call is to play it safe and then think about what other elements you could salvage. Certainly sleeping in a tent the second night, high 30s, wet temperatures. It's not entirely clear we would be in any condition to go on a hike, to go on a patrol. And we'd probably be playing catch up for the rest of the day. Afterwards, we find a lot of examples of people bailing because of the weather. We find examples of people generally traveling through inns, not roughing it and camping all the time, but traveling in inns. If you have an entourage, you have a harbinger who goes ahead and reserves your inn before your main retinue arrives, and then you arrive. So one of the things that I'm looking into is, you know, the extent to which tent, like in what contexts are we actually going to be camping in a tent? What context is that appropriate? And when is it appropriate to operate out of a structure of some kind? Okay, so that's the cool stuff, other cool stuff. And then we get to the slides. I'm not entirely sure I finished. Let's see if we have it. Okay, what next? All right, so the last trip was May 2021. What's next? What's on my current agenda? Right now, Jake has moved to the Netherlands, right? He's got a new job. He's in Europe. He's going to become one of those hardcore Euro reenactors, or not really. He's probably going to start something like this down the line, but in the near term, he's probably busy starting a new job, getting used to a new country. He's taken the tent, his armor, right? His Jeff Wasson custom Gothic harness, and he's taken the man-at-arms, right? Which means I'm stuck here in the US with none of those things. And I need to figure out, all right, what now? Again, going back to methodology, if I have good tools, I have to answer the questions I can answer with the good tools that I have, right? And so one of the things that I would like to explore now is just light infantry marches. Light infantry is not a medieval term, it's my modern term, but it's basically someone who's not wearing full harness, someone who's just generally wearing some torso protection and a helmet. But marches, what can we do? How much distance can we travel? How quickly can we travel? How much load can we bear? This allows us to dial in our kit. It allows me to onboard new people. I'm generally working with a group that's much more local and iterating much more quickly. So I'm holding events smaller scale events and iterating quickly with people that I can see on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. The second project that I have going on that's kind of in the short-term horizon is in cold weather. Me and Will, we're going to IGX, where I will give a more condensed and abbreviated version of this talk. The cold weather is another thing. I would like to come back with a vengeance, completely prepared for any weather that we faced in our first trip, in our second trip, or whatever the hell New Hampshire in October can throw at us. And so after this talk, I'm basically going to be furiously sewing for that kind of thing, basically prepping for, in my mind, an Arctic expedition, because I'm just so paranoid about cold weather now, cold and wet weather. Let me stop and see if there are any questions here. All right, so Pradana, yeah, thank you. We're gonna have to talk about this more, about Cleves, when to set up camp. Excellent. Okay, so what's next? Those are my two main things. I've got a local group that I'm working with to explore light infantry marches. We're answering questions, like if you've got light infantry gear, mail shirt, helmet, polearm, sidearm, purse, maybe some kind of water container. How far can you go? What are some modifications you'd make? What insights do you have into the gear? That's the kind of thing that I'm exploring. And that also is that those skills of just being able to move from point A to B with kind of a stripped pared down kit, I see as really forming the foundational skills for other things I'd like to explore. So certainly someone who squires for me should be able to operate as light infantry and be able to march a few miles, right? Like they should be able to march a few miles in like a mail shirt and not die. That's the bare minimum. So I'm thinking about kind of meta methodology and not trying to replicate a lance at the meta level, but rather just have a body of people I can call on who have a certain body of knowledge that I can rely on. Right. And cold weather, IGX, we'll see. Right. We may die, but I think we'll be fine. Just stacking wool on top of wool. Okay. So last slide here. At least I think this is the last slide. Yeah, the last slide is one. Okay. So the takeaways here. All right. I've shown you a lot of stuff, a lot of images. Some of it is very compelling. Some of it's like it's sexy. Like I don't want to brag, but I know when stuff is hot, right? And some of the videos and images are just sexy, right? You see that and you're like, I want that. I want that for myself. And the point of this talk is really about the methodology and the philosophy of the action of the activities that I'm undertaking. The crafting is a tool that supports my ability to ask and answer questions. And a lot of the imagery is so that people get immersed into their role and feel like they want to contribute in a manner that is consistent with the question that I'm asking. So for example, a lance with support, can they march a distance and, be combat effective at the end of it? Turns out the answer is yes. Like we're pretty confident we can do it. We know what we need. We need at least a certain number of people, and we know what we need to equip them with. So my main focus for this talk is about methodology and philosophy, searching for questions and thinking about creating decent answers, not necessarily the correct answer, but like good answers that people have to take seriously and respond to. The second thing, I've kind of already talked about this, but it's my thinking about this is more than materials and more than aesthetics. So I've kind of glided over a lot of the stuff I've made and a lot of the aesthetics and the fashion and tried to hone in on certain questions that we've had or certain inspirations or certain takes or angles on what it meant to be a knight or a person who's fighting in armor that have not been answered to our satisfaction. So I guess that's my fourth point. So, but they have not been answered to our satisfaction. Keeping watch, sleeping in armor, which we haven't done yet, but we'll try. How do we deal with weather? How do we deal with support? These are the kinds of questions that a lot of the activities we have right now don't really support. So when we see that gap, we're or at least I am, I'm thinking about how do I structure an activity to answer the question that I have. So that basically is it. I wanted to focus on methodology and philosophy that, I want you to think beyond materials. Certainly a lot of people, like my read on the HEMA atmosphere right now is that more people are interested in context and material culture, and they're diving into this. And so I want to be a step ahead of them and say like, okay, you've got the stuff, you've thought about aesthetics. What next? What should I do? What can I do with all of this stuff? Yeah, you can go to Ren fairs, you can hang out with reenactors, but like for some of you might be curious. You might want to think about how you can answer questions that you might have. And again, think critically about the activities that you're undertaking and what the gaps are in them, and then also what these historical approaches, what the historical approach might be to the types of activities that you're focusing on. That's about it. I think that that's all I have to say right now. I will stop and answer any questions that people have.
Okay, if you have questions, I'm happy to allow you to talk. Just raise your hand using the reactions, or you might have to go to the participants panel. There we go. We've got one. So I'm going to allow Michael to talk. And then go ahead and unmute yourself, Michael. I don't think we can hear you.
I can't hear him.
How about now?
There you go.
Yep.
I just had a question, or maybe a little prompt for Charles. I'm curious, I don't actually know the entire answer to this question though. You've said that you don't want to do any more milsim at HEMA events, which initially was sort of another activity along these lines you were doing at FNY and some other events. Why don't you want to do that anymore? Why do you think it's not a great idea or not useful?
Okay, let me explain the context for everyone, and then I'll kind of qualify what I meant by that. I ran 2 mass melees at Factional New York. Basically, I had to think about how to get a bunch of people to fight each other with kind of modern Bloss longsword gear, and fight each other safely and extract some degree of information, and get some kind of information out of it. The first one I ran, I wrote an article on this, but you don't have to read it. But I wrote an article on this, kind of my approach trying to extract information out of, kind of a rare opportunity. It was fun. People had a lot of fun. I had a few innovations that are like not really worth mentioning. But my main criticism of the entire exercise was that we were naked we were unarmored longsword fencers, just wailing away at each other in an open field. And I cannot find any historical source for that kind of activity, aside from maybe like a bowhurt or some other sportive activity. But like the fiction that people were telling themselves as these unarmored people with long swords killing each other on an open battlefield, it just doesn't happen. It's not a thing. I ran it a second time. I tried to think about changing up the parameters, the dimensions of the battlefield. So I constrained it. I thought about objectives where you try to push through people. None of those were really that helpful because the rule set and the mindset was unarmored people. And I just can't find a generalizable scenario where a bunch of people are fighting each other unarmored with long swords. It just doesn't seem to be a thing. There were scenarios where Jeff Wasson was in harness. Jake actually wore my harness without the cuirass, which he regretted. But basically, those were proto events where I was thinking about using opportunities like that to ask and answer questions, but I think they were not that helpful. So my main reason is that I don't think I could pull off that kind of thing, that particular mass Bloss melee, and get any useful information out of it, any kind of insight into what I understand to be the military thinking of the time. Hope that answers your question.
We have another question. This is Pradana. So Pradana, you should be free to unmute
now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's so good to hear your voice finally. You've been so helpful with all sorts of stuff. So thank you.
Well, not that much really, because I haven't had the time to properly write the stuff up. But anyways, like you mentioned, the issue of mass unarmored combat, and interestingly, there's a situation where that seems to have happened, and it's town and gown conflicts. You know those things, right? Where university students brawled against townsmen, and I think it's quite realistic that you couldn't draw useful combat conclusions from them, because in reality, these were like, gang fights.
Yeah.
They didn't exactly have clear winning conditions and everything, and it's basically a matter of a show of force.
Yeah.
You're trying to intimidate the other side to, back off and let you claim victory. And as
Yeah.
usual, in those cases afterwards, both sides claim victory.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Oh, okay. So I'm familiar with those actually, and in my mind, there's a scene from the oh, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, Maciejowski Bible. Mac Bible, that's I'm just gonna call it. But the Mac Bible, there's a scene where there's just like 30 people with daggers just like stabbing each other to death. So certainly that's a thing that happened. I actually took a different angle on that kind of brawl. Instead of a mass melee where everyone's given kind of symmetric advantages, I operated at a smaller scale. I've run events or taught classes on social violence that use a smaller number of people. We don't necessarily need 30 people on each side in order to get good usable information. Certainly in the spirit of including everyone and letting everyone have fun in the event, you'd want to include more people, but as you scale things up, your ability to observe and keep things safe diminishes, and your ability to control people's behaviors really diminishes. And so I think certainly the situation that you're talking about, kind of this social violence where it's in a kind of civilian context and people and brawls erupt, I've done and taught through in Long Point. I can send out some stuff to everyone, but the basic idea was, instead of using a mass event where it was essentially an open door policy, I would, for exploring these types of social violence, I would scale down, pare it down to just a few people on each side, 2, 3, 4, until I was confident I could scale it up, that enough people had been socialized into the mindset of what we were doing, and then I could add people. But that, again, does not resemble the mass melee in the sense of everyone given like roles, and then they played the game, and they won or lost, or they died and they went home. Instead, in the social violence scenarios and classes I taught, it was really about imbuing a role and imbuing a set of sense of purpose and boundaries within people that were more or less, my approximation of historic ones. Yeah, that's a very good point. Town and gown massacres, just the stab fest. It was great.
Thank you so much, Charles. Does anybody else have questions? Feel free to raise your hands. If you do, we've got one from Jordan. You can unmute yourself now, Jordan.
Okay, sound check, please.
Yep, you're good.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Hey, Charles, first off, thank you so much for putting this thing together. I immensely enjoyed it.
Thank the Swordsquatch people. All I do is just
everybody. I'm sure there's 1,000 people behind the scenes who I'll never know that helped put this together. So thank you to everybody, and also to all the folks who are supporting this just by logging on. First off, Charles, I want to compliment you on your academic rigor. I appreciate the fact that you even went to the length of citing the photographers and giving them credit for their work, and clearly articulating your sources throughout. I've been taking notes on that. I find it very helpful. I thought that it was also super awesome that you were very clear and transparent on the goals for your Lance expeditions throughout. I thought that was very, very awesome, and it harkens to a higher intellectual ideal. I think that's something that all of us can bring to everything that we do. But in specific, when you're talking about your next experiment, specifically with exploring light infantry marches, and you said, hey, take a group of folks, however many you can get, dress them up in a mail shirt, helmet, weapon, sidearm, water bag, see how far can you go. My question is, how are you going to control it for massive variations in physical fitness? That's my first thought, is like, you're going to have to have some form of baseline. Like you said, hey, can you walk and not die in a mail shirt? I think you were having a little bit of fun with that statement, but have you given more thought to kind of like, how, because you could have a million variations, weather, terrain, load, rate of march. But then certainly I would think the thing you'd start with is the physical capacity of the people who are participating. So if you have any thoughts on that, I would really welcome that.
Yeah. No, you hit on a good point. So this is something I'm still working on, but I'll lay out kind of a provisional idea here. The march serves two roles, right? Which is an experiment, a collection of empirical data, and the other one is developmental, which is developing people in order to understand what it is exactly that we're doing. And so there might come a time where I actually split the branches off. I take people who have a high level of physical fitness and say, all right, you are you are going to march this distance with historically accurate gear. You have fussed over it for months, so it's fit to you to, to the degree that we think that a soldier might fuss over their gear and modify and improve their gear. And we're going to figure out, okay, can we meet historic march paces, or I'm going to use historical march paces in air quotes because there's something else going on there. But what kinds of time standards can you meet, and how do they compare to modern ones? So just quick flash, just a preview, like that's something that you might be interested in. Is I'm gonna I'll talk to you later about that. But the other angle of the same activity, we do the same activity, is that it's developmental in the sense that we go out, and each iteration that we go out, we are forced to re-examine what exactly we carry. And so we can take someone who isn't very physically fit and get them to pare down on the things that they bring. A lot of one of the temptation, I don't want to say temptations, but one of the, like a very common thing that reenactors will do is they'll collect things. They'll collect things and they'll want to bring them, and they want them to show them and have them be on their body. And being forced to march a distance, which you might not be fully comfortable with, kind of really puts it into perspective, right? Like, do I really need a second sword? No, I don't. Do I need a sword and a dagger? Man, this sword is really long. It's bumping into everything. And so the second goal is developmental. And so there might come a time where this project splits, and there's one group that is for the collection of empirical data, and then another group, which might be which might subsume both, is purely developmental. We iterate and we fuss over our gear. We might look into footwear. We might think about water containers. We might think about sourcing water. But down the line, it might split off into two separate activities that each have a singular goal, rather than one activity that's kind of accomplishing both. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It brings to mind, a saying anybody who's been in the military will know, ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain, and everything looks cool on the store shelf and in your mind's eye until you have to carry it a couple of miles. So I think that's hugely instructive. When somebody has to do something not just once for fun, but hey, you do it 2, 3, 4, 5 times ad nauseum until it becomes your reality. I know you can't necessarily go that far, but I think that's kind of where that. I think that's what you're trying to do is to just see how far you can go in that reality.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. There was one other just really interesting thought that somebody put out there. I want to say the name is Kaja Sadowski, said something that there's some neat work that's being done around the ritual of putting on a uniform. I think that's really awesome. I mean, the mentality of a military unit, the mentality of people who are about to go work, very serious, brutal violence is an interesting thing, in the transformation that frankly civilized people have to go through, sometimes deliberately and sometimes just through accident. And folks who played maybe violent sports, football or hockey or lacrosse, might have some semblance of that experience. And I think that your classes on social violence might touch on that. And there's a lot of rituals that professionals go through in order to prepare people for something that is completely anathema to everything that's been ingrained in them from the day they were born. And everything that you're talking about seems to strike that. I mean, you talked about it, everything from the visual spectacle of the beautiful trail through the the misty mountains. That's a real thing that affects people in the moment. I can tell you stories about that offline. Getting dressed, or like when you're like, I know you've put on body, like modern body armor, there's something about the ripping of Velcro and the clicking of a plastic buckle on the helmet when you jack up and you're getting ready to go out the wire, you know?
Yeah.
I'm getting actually kind of worked up right now. Just thinking about those things, I feel my heart going, right? It's kind of like a horse, at the starting gate. And that's like, there's so many aspects you could take this. I mean, you could delve into psychology,
I've got a book. If you're interested in that angle specifically, that ritual, there's a book by Robert Jones called Bloodied Banners, and it talks about the function of armor as the appearance of armor. And I'm not sure if Kaya is specifically talking about his work or just the primary sources they're citing. But that book talks about the psychological effect of armor, both on people outside and as well as on the wearer. The arming process as one which is transformative and transforms someone from a civilian into a warrior, and the helmet as something that anonymizes the warrior and kind of protects them from the psychological horrors and dampening the hearing. You will love it. You'll get a kick out of this if this is the kind of thing that's coming to mind. Bloodied Banners by Robert Jones.
Thank you for that. I took a note of that. As a matter of fact, one of my own interests in future research is basically training, disciplining, and inoculating the mind to battlefield stress. So I've had the opportunity to talk, for example, to the on-scene commander at Ground Zero for 9/11 at the New York Trade Center, right? World Trade Center, sorry. He was a fire department battalion chief, and or talked to police officers who've been in lethal force scenarios, or just everyday American citizens who suffered a breaking and entering in their home or a violent crime. And how can we, we talk about training a soldier or anybody for physical dangers, but I don't think we have explored well, even in a professional context, how to prepare people for mental toughness when they face these true traumas. And we're only just now starting to understand the trauma of psychological injury. So that's just kind of another thing that I'm interested in, and basically preparing people to be more resilient mentally and spiritually. Because we're all in this forum, we talk primarily about people who are of military age, folks between the ages of like 15 and 40, given the century that you choose to study. And generally physically fit and almost always male, not always. But then once the soldier survives, at least physically, the battlefield, they have how many more decades to continue fighting those same battles and wars. And I think that what you're touching on here, even in a historical European context, I think that there's room maybe for other people, you if you wanted to, but other professionals to gain some benefit and to accelerate their own research, to have real life benefit to modern military professionals. That's where I'll leave it, but I'm open to any more discussion at any other time.
Yeah. We can chat about this later.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, we can chat about this later, but I'll just drop one more thing, that there are historic citations to medieval PTSD. I'll send you the links later. I mean, yeah, we'll chat offline about this. I'm wary of delving too much into that, mainly because I do not understand that, and I do not want to traumatize anyone who comes along beyond what the kind of conditions that we create for them are, but certainly not the trauma of killing anyone. That's not like that. I'm not interested or equipped to delve with that. So we'll chat online though. I've got more reading material for you. Okay.
And to that note, I might add that Kaya Sadowski's novel book on Fear is the Mind Killer, which is not a novel, it's nonfiction, is also down those lines, Jordan. It might be worth checking out. I'm going to interrupt quickly just because I noticed that people are starting to need to drop off. We want to thank you for showing up. If you want to help out and see if we can get Swordsquatch back in person next year, there's a link for donations in the chat. In the meantime, we've got a couple more questions. The first one is going to be from Marlene, who is, I believe, one of your squires. So I've gone ahead and made her able to talk.
Hey.
Hey.
So I know you and I kind of talked about this briefly, but I thought this might be a good forum. So for those trying to get started with this, who don't necessarily have the skills to sew or experiment or spend the money to have pre-made items, what would you say are your key ritualistic uniforms you can put on to help set the mind to test and answer these questions?
Oh, I see. Honestly, the way I think about it, I'm trying to handle most of the physical objects that people interact with, and I value the mindset that the person brings, both in terms of how they interact with the scenario, so the seriousness with which they take the role, but also their understanding of what their role is. So, for example, we've talked about this, right? Like, I don't expect people when they join to have the goal of buying harness or sewing or clothing, but really to have some aspect through which they can develop and research, and then also be an observer. Very frequently, I ask people, what did you think about this? Did you notice anything interesting? And that becomes the data. It's not numeric, it's not quantitative data, but it's certainly empirical qualitative data about the experience. So, for example, Michael Chittister's quote about "there's something magical about uniforms." That's a piece. He observed the effect of the uniforms on how we acted, and so there's nothing necessarily about the crafting process that immerses you in the role. It's really about just being mature, understanding when you're there for what's for immersion, what is actually the goal of the project, and making sure that you kind of observe, think about what you're doing, think about what you're feeling as well, like what feelings happen when certain things happen. So, for example, just so you know, like everyone, tomorrow I'm going to be handing off livery to people, and we're going to try to like dress up. And there's going to be a point probably in our next hike where we're going to be dressed up, and there will be a feeling, right? Take note of that. What is it? What is it, and why? What aspects form that? That's important to me. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of where I'm thinking. The expectations are generally not material for people that I'm bringing along.
No, that's good. I think that does clear it up. So I guess for those trying to get started, it really is just the mentality going in, and you can kind of create the, I guess, better outline, and then create the items that you find to be the most important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marlene. Our next question is from Matthew Benedict, and I have given you permission to unmute.
Hi, thanks. Charles, thanks for the talk. Super interesting. I just wanted to comment that there is a book called Medieval Warfare, a Reader, which is a collection of a lot of very interesting texts. It was put out by University of Toronto, and it kind of covers everything from like people setting up camp kitchens all the way through like PTSD and camp followers and all kinds of stuff. So that would be a good resource for anybody that's interested in that. And just kind of wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. I have a small library of books like that. One book that I have is the Oxford Encyclopedia of Medieval Warfare. Oh, okay, hang on. It's the cropping here. There you go. But it's not just this book. It's actually 3 of these. One of the problems I have, I think, with medieval texts generally is that they're very broad, and they generally focus on how warfare is conducted in maybe the high medieval period, or they're interested in professional armies. Late 15th century warfare is just in this armpit between the high medieval period and then professional armies, and nobody really cares about late 15th century warfare. So a lot of medieval historians don't write much about it, mainly because it's when knightly armies were in their decline. And if I have to like put it in a glib way, we're recreating the armies that get destroyed by the Swiss. And I'm okay with that, because I have questions, I want context, but I know for sure the armies that we recreate get absolutely just crushed by Swiss soldiers. But yes, I'll look into that. That was University of Toronto, Medieval Warfare, or Reader. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Cool.
There's also an interview with the authors on the medievalist.net podcast.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I'll definitely look at that. Thank you.
And just as a reminder, Matthew Benedict's session for Swordsquatch will be tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific. So if you haven't registered, go check that out. He'll be discussing honor.
Yeah, we'll define what honor is and some fun social context for it. So if social violence and societal interests is something that you think would be valuable to understanding your HEMA practice, you should show up tomorrow at 7.
Yeah. All right, are there any other questions for Charles today? One more from Jordan. Go ahead and unmute yourself. You still have permission.
Thank you. I'll keep this one brief. Charles, you read 2 different quotes during your presentation. The first one was the Iberian Knight or a squire. What was the second source that you read from? I'm interested in that.
Yeah. I pull out the book here and put my face above it so you can see. There you go. Le Jouvencel. It was recently translated by Craig and Jane Taylor. So it hasn't like the insights. There we go. There we go. Okay, it's not working. Craig, Le Jouvencel. I'll send you the link actually. But it's a translation of the autobiography of a French knight and his combat. If I had to characterize the novel, it reads like a video game tutorial where there is a narrative, but he's structuring the narrative so that you learn how to be a knight as you read the story of his life. So almost certainly certain parts are fictionalized, but there are still some details that, we can glean from it. So for example, he talks about how to set up watch at night, with 6 people along a road. Where should they position themselves? He talks about, constricted spaces. When should you mount? When should you dismount? He talks about looting, a lot of looting. He does a lot of looting. When should you loot? When shouldn't you loot? How should you divide the loot? How should you divide prisoners? That kind of stuff. Really good context. But again, autobiography. So, we have to also critically examine how reliable it is as a source.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Charles, we do have a request to have the title of that book typed out in chat.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that
yeah.
People can Google it.
Yeah. Jouvencel, translated by Craig Taylor. That is, I think it's Boydell. Boydell and Brewer. Yep, Boydell. Boydell is the publisher.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Charles.
Mhm.
All right. Any other questions? Usual, it has been a delight to have you, Charles. Your session last year was great too. And this has been very, very interesting. I have no interest in doing what you're doing, but I know Aiden does. So that's too cold. So thank you again. If anybody has additional questions, please feel free to let us know. You can comment on the Facebook pages, or again, you can join our Discord and we'll get those out there. Marlene, did you have another question?
Oh, I was just wondering if Charles wanted to share his, any other areas where we can follow your research as it evolves and develops.
Oh yeah, good question.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. We have to think about this. I'm going to talk with Jake some more about this because it's probably going to split off into its own page. And right now I'm just blogging stuff, and it's very much under my own kind of weird experiments that I run. This might separate into a separate project that kind of Jake and I collaborate on. And where it becomes something larger. Right now, we're not sure. And again, that goes back to this preliminary, the idea that this activity is very preliminary. Right now, it'll just be my blog, practiceandart.wordpress.com. It's not super professional. I'd like to get something a little bit cleaner, especially when we go more public with this. Especially when we start hitting reenactor circles and other adjacent activities. I'd like it to look presentable and be such that people kind of take us seriously in how we conduct things. So my blog, practiceandart.wordpress.com. Let me type it out here, actually.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, well, barring any other questions, thank you and everyone. Oh, Matthew, you got another one?
Oh, Charles, are you sending that to everyone? I don't see those comments in the.
Oh no, I'm sending it to hosts and oh my God. Noob mistake. Hang on, let me do Le Jouvencel by Craig and Jane Taylor, translated. And then blog is practiceandart.wordpress.com. And there you'll find a bunch of stuff, a bunch of projects, but I don't know. I think if you scroll through it, you'll kind of get an idea of like where my head is at and how I approach things.
I think that's all of our questions for tonight. Again, lots and lots of thanks yous.
Oh, I totally had a typo. Yes. Kat has the right one.
I'll copy it and paste it for everyone.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Totally okay.
It's late. I'm tired. I was making these slides last minute.
It's all right. You
Also,
have,
check out this fabric here. Everyone, check out this fabric. Isn't it cool?
so
It's really
good.
cool.
The
Not
best.
real, by the way, in case anyone was fooled, but it's a nod to my next project. So
I was completely fooled. I thought that was actual
Yes,
fabric
of
that you were
course.
using
yes, of course.
because
Yeah.
we'll also make sure to link your website in a post from Swordsquatch.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up now. And again, thank you for staying up so late. I know it's very late for you.
This
So
is when I start sewing.
yeah.
I'm weird.
No, I think some of the best crafting is done in the middle of the night for sure.
Oh, yeah. Middle of the night, right before a thing happens, right? Right before an event. That's when
Yeah.
productivity hits its peak.
Exactly. All right. Everyone, good night and have the best of days.
All right.